Thanks, everybody, for joining. I know it's all different time zones, so we appreciate it. So this discussion's about the human side of things. And so as we're dealing with this pandemic and navigating through the crisis, I just want to, my name is Beverly Geiger. We've all kind of chatted here earlier this week, but I'm one of the executives here at MicroStrategies, and I just want to thank you all, everybody, for joining us. It's such a great topic. I think a lot of leaders are really kind of struggling with this. So I'm Beverly Geiger. I wanted to introduce Michael. Michael's one of my peers here. So Michael, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Michael Schuckman. I've been with Micro for over a decade, started our analytics practice, and recently managed our cybersecurity practice. So thanks for everyone for joining.
Thank you, guys. So we realize this is, a culturally defining moment for organizations, and it's really hard for leaders to navigate the day-to-day and then figure out how to manage the future. So, our goal today is really for you to come, for the panelists, but even, the audience, to really come away with something like a new idea, a new perspective, a new strategy that they can apply to navigate through this crisis. We're going to go ahead. I'm going to introduce the panels. We're going to have a discussion and questions, and then at the end, we'll see if we can have some time for other questions as we go through this. So again, thanks, everybody. So I'm going to dive into the panel introductions. So we've got Cy here. He's a transformational leader, an executive coach and consultant and entrepreneur. So welcome, Cy. And then we've got Dr. Paige Williams. Thank you for coming from such late in the morning or early in the morning, whatever. A speaker, mentor, anti-fragile leadership in the decade of disruption. And then Dr. Dana Kilsanen, futurist, designer, psychologist, founder and CEO of Evolutionary Guidance Media. So what I'm going to do is just have you guys really quickly kind of go through and just kind of introduce yourselves, a little bit what you're about, and then we're going to dive into questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Cy first, and then we'll go through Paige and Dana, if you guys don't mind. So I'm going to turn it over for your moment. Just tell us what you're about.
With such brilliance on the panel, I'd be remiss to introduce myself first. So I'm going to ask Michael and Beverly to please choose someone else. I am in awe of just being with Paige and Dana.
All right, so I'm going to go according to how I see people in my slides. So I'm just going to pick you that way. So Paige, could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm based here in near Melbourne in Australia, and for the last 10 years or so, I've been working at the Centre for Positive Psychology at the University of Melbourne. I've been teaching, researching and lecturing there alongside my own private practice. I'm passionate about leveraging leadership and using neuroscience and positive psychology as the basis for that, and also informed by systems science and systems thinking. So leadership in the context of systems, leadership is one of the most potent leverage points we have to create positive change within systems. And that in the last year or so has come together around this idea of anti-fragility. And what does it mean for us to help leaders understand how they can be anti-fragile, how they can create anti-fragile teams and help their team members be anti-fragile, and beyond that, how they can create systemic anti-fragility through their leadership. So leadership for me is the leverage point, it's the access point, and it's the most potent lever that we have to create anti-fragility, and it comes from the inside out, but it also then creates system change from the outside in for the people within the system. So that's a brief summary of what I'm about.
Thank you. Very nice. So I'm going to move to Dana now because Cy wants ladies first. So go ahead, Dana.
Okay. I am the CEO of Evolutionary Guidance Media, which is an R&D lab. I focus on the intersection of human psychology and technology. I'm particularly interested in interdependence and how that is impacting our changing mythologies. I got very interested in the anti-fragility idea and started applying it to thinking about mindsets. I guess leadership, but I kind of focus on heroism, and I see anti-fragility and heroism as very synonymous, really, that in our lexicon before we had anti-fragility, the term that we would have used for people who kind of were able to be more resilient, go above and beyond, was the heroic mindset. So I've kind of been looking at the intersection there. And I just like transdisciplinary scholarship, so I'm very interested in bringing things together. And that sort of sums up my background.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
There's such wisdom on the panel. I'm completely in awe. So that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So just very briefly about my background, I really focus, I work with organizations across many landscapes, many scales, both at the C-suite and in the trenches. And the thing that I really focus on, and this is what I've learned over the years, most people and most organizations have, number one, a difficulty dealing with reality. So that's one aspect of what I really integrate. And then the other aspect, which has been already exemplified in just the introductions, quite honestly, as well as all the work that's already been shared today, and especially the previous conversation, that the second aspect is human nature. You've got reality, you've got human nature, quite honestly. And those, the intersection, the third piece, when those intersect, we're talking about people's identity, individually, collectively, organizationally, we call it culture. And I think the word also was mentioned previously, awareness, that brings it all together. So what I'm about fundamentally, helping organizations deal with the reality, the good, bad, and ugly, with human nature, the good, bad, and ugly, bringing it together through identity and awareness to truly have a positive impact in the world. So thank you for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here with Paige and Dana.
Yeah, thank you guys. So such an impressive group here. So I'm going to go ahead and start the first question, if you don't mind. So you all kind of just mentioned it. We all talk about leaders having, an anti-fragile mindset and our ability to move beyond the crisis to recovery. How would you define an anti-fragile mindset, and what does it mean to each one of you? So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to start with Dana first. I'm going to go now the opposite order. Can we start with you, Dana?
Well, for me, there's sort of a cluster of different elements that are part of that mindset. And obviously, which I think one of the areas Paige specializes in is the positive psychology. So I'm going to let her speak a little bit more about that area. One of the other areas that I'm very interested in is the personal narrative. So our own personal mythologies, and whether we think of ourselves as having a fixed mindset or a growth mindset, is a very important feature of what I would say is a anti-fragile mindset. Some of the metaphors that I like to think about for the anti-fragile mindset, instead of the diamond, because that one's used a lot, but I like to look to other areas of nature, such as like the mycelium that's under the ground, and the fungi, because that's something that is actually interconnected. It's how our forest speaks to each other. And it's also sort of a metaphor for the interconnection of the World Wide Web and our technology. And if we think of the way that the fungi kind of takes something back to nature, right? Like a mold, right? If you leave a piece of fruit, it's going to be dissolved, basically. But then from that becomes a new mushroom, and that takes over and is the basis of nature. In fact, we have to have the fungi kingdom. And so I think that one way of thinking about the anti-fragile mindset is this idea of being able to dissolve and then regenerate. So that we get strengths from that idea of not just something being hard for us and then us bouncing back, but actually sometimes being destroyed and coming back as something new. Also, we can think of it as the butterfly that dissolves, into a mass, and then, or the caterpillar that dissolves and comes out as a butterfly. So it comes out as something different than what it was before. So that's kind of my thoughts right now on that area. And they're still developing as I do more research on this mindset. So.
Thank you. Thank you. No, thank you. I appreciate it. Now, what about you, Sai?
So thank you for the question, and I really appreciate what Dana's already shared with us. The whole notion of creative destruction is very powerful, is extremely powerful. And, as I mentioned, I work with organizations to help them deal with reality. Most organizations, most individuals respectively can't deal with the destructive aspects that they have to go through. So we have to learn to let go in order for something new to be born. So as I've applied anti-fragility with organizations, with team members, with executives, etc., really focusing on the ability to evolve from a situation, not simply be resilient to it or robust to it, but to truly go one step further and to be able to evolve from it. That's one core aspect. So generally thriving, if you will. The other aspect that is connected to that, which is extremely crucial, is to not assume that the world is stable. So not seek stability, but rather actually seek disorder in order to be able to evolve from it. This is radically different than returning to an equilibrium or presuming that the world is stable. Or and I'll push it further. We've heard in the social space, there's been a lot of conversation about, if you will, the next normal, right? Everybody's been talking about the next normal. Then that shifted. Then the shift was fundamentally, well, is there a never normal? That was another shift that happened so quickly. And then it continues. And the next shift became ever normal. That seems to be the most recent emergent factor. I've also heard better normal. I got to be honest with you, that all those things focuses on the word normal. What I'm claiming very openly is there is no normal. There is no normal. And I will even mention and say that we are potentially moving into a time frame where we are dealing with the abnormal. Abnormal being the absence of a normal. So exactly as Dana said, and I realize I'm a little bit long-winded before I leave you with the answer to this question. Fundamentally, gaining from the stresses, seeking those stresses. We go to the gym in order to seek those stresses. That's not asking for stability. We have to seek disorder, leverage disorder and turbulence, and come out stronger. Not an easy feat, but learning to let go of things and embrace death is one aspect of it.
How did you get through that without saying the new normal or the normal of the week?
There is, and you know me quite well, my good friend. For me, there is a no normal. It's very very open that I've shared with Paige and Dana. Likewise, I've died 3 times to really recognize the power of death and the focus that can provide you with. And I'm sure we all have our personal journey.
Yeah. Thank you, Cy. We appreciate it. Great insights. Definitely, challenge and makes people think. So appreciate your insight. And what about you, Paige?
So I think great points by Dana and Cy there. I think one of the absolutely essential mindsets around this is that leaders do need to let go of the need for control. We've never had control, so we've got to stop pretending that we've got it and stop kind of hanging on to it, because we can't control our environment, we can't control all aspects of other people's behaviors, and we need to let go of expectations around leaders being able to do that and have all the answers. We need to let go of that, and leaders need to let go of that. So this idea of letting go is a big one in terms of a mindset. I also really agree with this idea of actually allowing things to die, because that's a natural part of systems. Systems go through a cycle, and death within a system kind of perspective is just part of the growth cycle. Things need to die in order to create space, in order for there to be regeneration and growth. And again, we need to accept that. That all of us need to accept that, leaders need to accept that, and we kind of all need to grow up a bit. We need to stop being protected and expecting to be protected by leaders. They're not parents, they're leaders, and sometimes they have to deliver hard messages that aren't easy to deliver and aren't easy to hear. And that's the reality of it. So as you speak to what's the reality of the situation, Cy, I really agree with that too. There's one other mindset that in the book that Cy just mentioned, I'm just in a process of finishing. There are 3 aspects to an anti-fragile mindset that I believe. One, Dana mentioned, which is the growth mindset, work of Carol Dweck, which is really about us living in what I call the learning loop, which is where we are constantly in a test and learn mentality. Taleb calls it tinkering. You can think about Tinkerbell, the Disney character, where you find lost things, and you find a lost thing and you look at it and you go, how can I use this? How can this be useful to me? So as leaders, how can we tinker? How can we put into place small, constant experiments that mean that we're kind of feeling small bits of pain? We talk about immunization and saying injecting a little bit of the virus, which I know is kind of a scary word at the moment, but introducing a bit of the virus makes us stronger. Well, doing this test and learn, having a growth mindset, means that we're constantly trialing new things, which means we build up our resilience to failing. And that's one of the biggest things we need to do to become anti-fragile. The two other aspects I think are crucial to a leader's mindset in terms of anti-fragility. One is reflective, so reflection in and on action. It's the work of Donald Schon. So how can we be reflective, but not just from a distance in terms of time, but actually reflect in action as we go? And how can we play what I call the infinite game? So how is it that we can have a benefit mindset so that as we put into action our growth mindset, as we learn as we go, as we let go of control, embrace the mess and magic of real life, we do it not from a base of ego, not from a base of self-service, but because we want to contribute and because we want to actually make things better beyond our term in office or beyond our term in leadership or this project lifespan, but because we want to contribute to something more long-term beyond ourselves. So those are the three elements for me: growth, reflective, and benefit mindset.
Yeah.
I love what you both shared, because it really begins to integrate ego death, quite honestly, with heroism, right? It begins to integrate it, and sometimes we refer to it as courage. And when we see courage, it's exhilarating, it's insatiable, quite honestly. So I really appreciate what concepts you're both integrating, Dana and Paige.
Dana,
Well, actually,
I love that you brought up the heroic mindset, because I think that this idea of a personal journey towards anti-fragility is that it's a journey. But I've really tussled with the idea of it being a hero's journey, because I think we become anti-fragile in our everyday lives. It doesn't mean that we kind of leave and have to go into another world to go on our anti-fragile journey. So I'm fascinated to see what's your work exploring in terms of that kind of heroic mindset and anti-fragility?
Well, I'll have to say that one of the most interesting things and what you just pointed out is that, like, we don't really have to leave our everyday life. And the work of Phil Zimbardo around heroism, one of the things he found is that when you ask the average person about who are their heroes, most commonly what people respond is their parents, their mother, their father, maybe a grandparent. So in fact, we think that, so he actually started talking about everyday heroism. And so I think that the mindset, the anti-fragile mindset, is somehow connected in there with that whole idea of the everyday heroic. And so that, I think one of the problems, or challenges, I should say, with our societies today is we aren't teaching terminology like anti-fragile mindset, that this is a new mindset, we didn't have a word for it. Again, maybe the heroic is the closest that we've had. And I think that this is something very important for youth, for all ages. But obviously, if we grow up with this idea in our head that there is something beyond resilience, that's very important. And especially as we move towards more challenges like the climate challenge, climate crisis and things like this, that the new heroic mindset and anti-fragile mindset are sort of a united mindset that we're going to need to just get through challenging times. And sort of back to what you said, Sai, about the normal, this word normal coming up, it's really interesting because in futures studies, we call it the post-normal times. So the word normal is still there, but they're saying post, like, normal is not there anymore. So I think that, it all ties together, that we're birthing something new, and the sooner it can be disseminated, the better off we're going to be.
No, I appreciate, thank you for the insight. I'm sorry, Sai, did you have something you wanted to say? Go ahead.
Forgive me, for my apologies. I was going to ask actually Paige and Dana to a question is, in your work with leaders, especially, I'll say specifically, how have you been able to engage them to help them confront, knowingly or unknowingly, for them, if they've experienced it, how they've experienced it, what they've let go of?
Paige, let you.
I don't know that I have been able to yet, if I'm honest. I don't know that I have been able to. Sometimes it depends on the level of self-awareness of the leader and their openness to their openness to go on the journey with understanding that actually by letting go of something, it hasn't made them anything less as a leader. And so sometimes if I've been on a journey with them, particularly some of the executive coaching I've done, then I can step them through what they've let go of as we've spent time together. But sometimes that's very much me holding a hand through that process, and then they'll come to that reflective insight at the end. But often people are not, often leaders are not self-aware enough to do that work on their own, which is,
Definitely. And I mean, forgive me, and I phrased the question from how have you coached them through it to get them through that journey so that they recognize, if you will, they've got to let go of something. And exactly to both of your points and the way that we're discussing the topic, once they recognize that you can actually let go of something, they've already achieved a degree of anti-fragility, and really there's a shift that manifests, very crucial. But if they don't have that degree of experience with a partner as a coach, it could be very, very different, if you will, exactly as you're saying. So I'm eager to learn from both of you likewise. So by all means, please share.
All that, right? Nice.
I don't know if Dana, you wanted to add something there.
Oh, well,
Yeah, forgive me. Yeah, did you have, yeah, Dana or Paige?
I
Yeah.
was just going to say, and I think it ties to what Paige was saying, back to the personal mythology and your own narrative. So I think when you're working with leaders, you have to really, well, you don't have to, but one way is to start them on this exploration of their own personal narrative, so that they can actually start some of the, the plays at work in the background of the psyche, and then by recognizing, be able to let go and find that they have found something new. And that speaks again to that regenerative cycle, that you haven't lost anything, you found something.
Yep.
I think the challenge in this can be, I think the challenge in this for leaders can be, they can let go of things, they can be prepared to, but it's whether the system around them is prepared for them to let go as well. And so I think we have this dual dynamic going on around what leaders, a leader may think they should be as a leader, and then what their followers or their system, as I broadly call it, thinks they should be as a leader as well. And so the challenge we sometimes have is that one of those systems shifts, so the leader may shift, but if the system around the leader doesn't shift, it's very difficult. We get these gaps that exist between, what the leader knows they can let go of and feels they should and could and wants to, and then what they're being drawn back into because the expectations of the system around them haven't adjusted in the same way. And Michelle used a great metaphor in the talk before us about a tango and there being partners and we're having to move in sync, and sometimes the follower, if the follower isn't moving in sync, then something's going to break or they're going to trip over each other. And it's that dynamic between the leader and their system as well. So it's about not only leaders letting go of things, but actually us changing expectations around what leadership looks like. And I think that comes back to your point, Dana, about we need to really disseminate this idea of what anti-fragility really is and how it's lived out in an authentic way.
Very well said. I think exactly to all the points that you're bringing up. It's not one-dimensional. It's multi-dimensional. It's paradoxical. It's not even really the system and a leader, because everyone is a leader from a particular vantage point, and that those intersection of all those forces is very, very paradoxical. And I ask the question because in my experience, likewise, in working with leaders, it's finding the opportunities really to in practice, in practicality, to help them confront those barriers and break through those barriers very, very specifically. But it has to be in practice, and that tends to be the key thing that I have discovered. If it isn't in practice, quite honestly, it's all talk. But if it's in practice, right, they make that breakthrough, they get through it, and it's multidimensional and paradoxical, as you mentioned. The tango is a great example if we're all tangoing together, and if you will. So well said. Thank you both. My apologies, Beverly and Michael.
Sure.
No, it's the tango without stepping on each other's toes.
So
thank you. So I'm going to go ahead. Michael, I know you had some questions.
Yeah, I was just going to circle back to something you said. One of the interesting points that I've learned is the difference between robust, where you're trying to just survive the chaos, and the anti-fragile movement, where you're trying to thrive through it. It takes me to some of my historical favorite folks, those like Ben Franklin or even Winston Churchill. They seem to have more, the heroism and the heroic virtues. So I was wondering what historical figures, pre-anti-fragility, would you call out as the early anti-fragilists, and what we could maybe learn from them? For me, I did thinking about it. I think of Ben Franklin in the sense that we had houses catching on fire and we didn't have plumbing. So not only did he invent the lightning rod, he invented the fire department, which seems kind of simple, but so it's super resilient and, thriving and growing beyond the problem.
I think one that I would name, which is a big one that I've been a fan of for most of my life, is actually the combo of Helen Keller and Annie Sullivan, because Helen Keller, of course, suffered and lost all of her senses. And then Annie Sullivan had been through a lot of trauma, living in tenement housing, and she lost her brother at a young age. And then she learned from Alexander Graham Bell, like somehow she was brought in and she learned and she went and taught Helen Keller. And, she tried over and over to reach Helen through using, signing in her palm. And, eventually when she put one of her hands under a water pump, and then she signed the word water into the other one, Helen had this breakthrough and realized suddenly this wasn't a game, that actually this thing she was doing was the word for water. And I think that they actually stayed together for their whole lifetime, as far as, teacher and student. But Helen, I would say, really, she thrived even through all of the disability, let's say, challenges she had, because she also went on to found all kinds of organizations, and improve the lot of blind and deaf people all around the world. So again, she rose above something that was a challenge and made something more out of it. And I would say that Annie Sullivan did the same thing, being born in poverty and going on to, be renowned for being able to reach this person and continue to educate her. I think Helen actually learned, I don't know, several languages in her lifetime. I don't even know how many, but anyway, for me, she's sort of up there on anti-fragility.
Nice, thank you. Sire,
I got to say, was too busy listening to Dana, so I still don't have one. So, Si, I'm handballing this one to you.
You're very kind. So I'll tell you, I would say very openly, every historical figure across the board. That's why they are very much a part of history, is they've achieved a degree of anti-fragility. They've had an impact, and they've gained from it very, very much so. And it really goes to independent of intent. So I want to be very, very clear. Independent of intent, if you will, anti-fragility can be achieved. Some did some positive things, historical figures, right? And some did perhaps less positive things. But independent of intent, every historical figure has made a dent in history. Additionally, when I work with individuals and organizations, the big reminder that we have to carry with us is that we all come into the world actually anti-fragile, very openly. And what ends up happening is the societal factors that come into play, the social conditioning that I like to say, that begins to tease it out of us. And some point in time, and at some point in time, we get it so teased out of us that we lose the life that's within us. And that becomes very detrimental. So every figure, my friend, you have a great question. You stumped me on it. I give you every figure. Choose one.
Let me give you one that has a definitive right answer for each of you. You know, each of you are very passionate in this space.
But I want to hear what Paige has to say first about what figure she has. Forgive me,
Do you know
Michael.
what's just come? I'll tell you what, I've got an answer. It's not a person, but it speaks to my heritage. I think that the royal family are pretty anti-fragile, right? Just as an institution, they have been through some stuff, pretty public stuff, I think we'd all agree.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yet, when I look at what's going on in the UK right now around COVID, the national addresses that the Queen has made still gets to the heart of the country in terms of lifting spirit, bringing people together. So, you know, in terms of relevance, we know that's ebbed and flowed. In terms of making front page headlines, we know that there's been a few of those. But in terms of an institution, I reckon the British royal family are pretty anti-fragile.
It's a great example. Oh,
Sure.
yes, both of your examples. Yes, well said.
Very
Well
good.
said.
So an easier question where there's a definitive right answer. Each of you are very passionate. What drives your passion and why are you in this space? If you could share 1 or 2 minutes on that one.
Oh.
I'm eager to hear Dana and Paige. Forgive me. So I'm very eager to hear because I'm
So
a huge
Dana, if you
fan.
want to go
I got to
first.
tell you.
Dana, you go.
I am driven by the idea of planetary consciousness and the importance of this. It's more important than ever.
Oops, we're losing a little bit. We're
need,
losing you just a little bit, Dana. I don't know. Okay, go ahead. Maybe try it again. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you.
I think that you know, we have just arrived at a time where all businesses, you know, any kind of structure of business, and every level of education, that this is the essential issue of the day. It's not, there's not any one thing that we can do to change everything. The only way that we're going to make a difference actually is through helping people understand our interconnectedness. And I really feel like the COVID-19 crisis, in that sense, again, comes back to this conversation on anti-fragility, because it is helping people see how interconnected we are. Now, there's going to be the fear and the pushback of saying, well, you know, we're staying in, we're going to disconnect, we're not going to engage in as much global whatever travel, etc. But there's no doubt that, I mean, like, even in my personal life, somebody who studies this and looks at it a lot, I was, you know, I think it was it was sometime in December, I was working with some suppliers from China, and of course it was already going on there. And I remember, you know, messaging to the supplier and saying, I hope that you and your family and everyone is safe. And at that time, of course, I wasn't thinking, oh, wow, that's coming here. That's going to be coming here. And in fact, if I was putting into practice all of my own thoughts on interdependence, I would have had more foresight to think it's going to arrive here because we are so interconnected. Travel is taking place. And in fact, you know, I wasn't sitting there worried about how to start preparing for COVID-19 crisis in the US. So I guess all I can say is I think this crisis is helping people to see this interdependence. I think the rapid, you know, use of the internet, people doing more webinars, children having to do lessons online, is also helping people see how this interconnectivity works. And that if we can help people think about our planet, and again, how interconnected we are to that. And we're seeing, you know, things being cleaned up around the world, the canals in Venice, the water being clean, and so forth and so on, that this can help us make the types of changes that we need to make in order to protect the planet.
Yeah, it's a very physical symbol of the connectivity. Just some people want to wear masks, other people don't want to wear masks. So just that alone kind of gives you the communal impact. So Paige, I'll let you answer.
So I think I alluded to this when I gave my intro. I think that leadership, and by leadership, let's be clear, I mean little L leadership. The leadership, the way that we show up every day, how we choose to bring ourselves into relationship with others, into relationship with the planet, to Dana's point. So I think leadership is the leverage point that we have to create change. I think that we all have latent leadership capacity that we have yet to realize. And I think that helping each of us understand how we can become more anti-fragile will access that latent leadership capacity and will help us leverage it in a way that contributes to the greater good for the collective benefit. And that for me is what it's about.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Move to closing.
Well said. Well said with Dana and Paige. It's a great question you ask, Michael, because what I've experienced is folks, especially as this conference has come together, folks who are in this space are extremely passionate, very, very passionate about this work. I want to answer the question, but I just want to kind of give just a precursor sort of thought or statement. I think one thing that's key for all of us to keep in mind is it's a spectrum. Fragility, right? And anti-fragility is on a spectrum. That's extremely crucial. So you're actually not fragile or anti-fragile in the sense you have greater or less fragility or anti-fragility relative to a specific source of stress and a specific range of stress. So it doesn't mean you're immortal by any stretch. And that's crucial for people because as I think I'm sure Paige has seen it and Dana's seen it amongst others at the conference. There's a number of people that were not invited to the conference, quite honestly, because they're abusing the concept respectfully. And it's not our concept. We're learning together. So with that backdrop, to your point, the thing that drives me the most is the potential. The potential, exactly as Paige has shared and exactly as Dana said. The potential is huge. And the problem is far too many of us don't believe in that potential anymore. And it's a shame because it's a terrible shame because there's a lot of good people, good organizations, and I use the word good meaning they could have a positive impact in the world that are not embracing the opportunity and the challenge to do so. So I don't stop believing in someone or something until it stops believing in itself. But once it stops believing in itself, then it is fundamentally dead and there is nothing left for me to believe in. So human potential, my good friend, and all potential.
I think we almost have like 2 minutes left. Kelly, how much time we have?
Yeah. Because I was going to ask, I'm sorry, how much time, Kelly?
We need to wrap up now. Thank you.
Okay.
So thank you, Beverly. Thank you, Michael. And most deeply, thank you, Dana and Paige. It's tremendous to be with you. And I hope we could do this again. You're absolutely incredible individuals. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
and thank you, Micro, for hosting the conference. It's great.
Yeah, well, thank you, you guys, and thank you for everybody, for all of you joining. And I know you said, Paige, I know it's still the middle of the night for you. So, and thanks, Dana and Sai. So we really appreciate all the insights. So, just having people think about this and how they face the pandemic and what do they learn out of it is really important. So your insights are great. So thank you very much.